Hey there, welcome to episode 110 of the Social Business Engine podcast, the podcast where I invite thought leaders from all industries to share their real-world expertise on social and digital communications best practices. I'm Bernie Borges from Find and Convert and your host of the Social Business Engine podcast. On today's episode, you are going to meet Stephen Marshall, Asia Pacific Program Manager for IBM's Global C-Suite Study. On this episode, you are going to learn what the modern CMO is focused on. Stephen will share findings from the 2015 Global C-Suite Study from the perspective of Chief Marketing Officers around the globe. This episode is sponsored by our very own Social Business Workshop for Business Development. This online workshop is delivered in both group and one-on-one coaching sessions. It's designed for business development teams who want to learn how to use social media channels to build key relationships that create sustained sales results. To learn more about this online workshop, just visit socialbusinessengine.com/workshops. And now, here's my interview with Stephen Marshall, Asia Pacific Program Manager for IBM's Global C-Suite Study. Stephen, welcome to the Social Business Engine podcast.
Good morning, Bernie. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you. And I have to begin by just pointing out what you just said. I'm sitting here a little after 5 p.m. U.S. Eastern in sunny Florida. But, Stephen, it's morning for you. So where are you?
So I'm based in Middle Earth, in Christchurch, New Zealand, and it is about 9 a.m. on Wednesday morning, so one day ahead of the rest of the world. But I'm pleased to report that it will be a fine day tomorrow as well.
I'm so glad to know that. Well, as I mentioned before we started recording, and I know how you responded, and you feel free to repeat that. Your location is on my bucket list to get to one day.
Look forward to meeting you in person when you finally get around to that.
Well, I certainly do look forward to it. Well, Stephen, why don't we begin with a brief overview of the IBM Global C-Suite Study. It's something that I'm familiar with, but maybe not all my listeners are. So what is it and why does it matter?
Sure. So the C-Suite study is part of a series of studies of business leaders that IBM, under the Institute for Business Value, or IBV as we call it, conduct around the world. The IBV is the business research of IBM. The C-Suite study, or the one that we're going to be talking about today, is the 18th global study since we first started performing these back in 2003. So not only do we have a wealth of data from more than 28,000 interviews across those 15 years, but we also have a great deal of longitudinal data, questions that we've asked year after year. We can start to see a number of patterns and themes developing as business changes, as markets change, and certainly as new technologies come on board and influence the way industries work. What's really unique about the C-Suite study program is that, first of all, the interviews are all conducted face-to-face. So we're able to capture obviously quantitative data, but also a lot of qualitative responses, which really add a lot of color and flavor to the reports that we ultimately end up writing. And it's amazing how much insight the interviewees are prepared to provide to us when we conduct the surveys in this way.
Stephen, I have to ask, are these appointments difficult to get? I mean, obviously IBM's a big brand, so
Sure.
You've got a name, but these are C-suite people across the world.
Yeah, and they are challenging, but the luxury we have, I suppose, is that being a big company, we rely on our client-facing organization to conduct the interviews themselves. So whether that's part of the client account team or perhaps our consulting partners, they're usually at a fairly senior level themselves. So they're kind of doing peer-to-peer meetings and interviews. So that's helpful, and but it is challenging. And the latest study, we managed to achieve more than 5,000 of these face-to-face interviews from more than 70 countries around the world. So right now, we believe it's the largest research program looking at the C-suite level in the world to be conducted outside an academic environment, which we're pretty proud of. So, very big program, and it means that we can have both statistical reliability, plus we can correlate and compare responses against actual company and industry performance to identify what we call outperformers, or in this case, torchbearer companies, are doing a little bit differently from the rest of the world.
So before we get into that in a little more detail, I have to ask, because this C-suite study that you publish every year, it's available for free. All I have to do is fill out a form, but I'm never asked for a credit card. In fact, I'm kind of surprised I'm not charged thousands of dollars for these insights.
That's a good idea. We should change that.
So aside from the fact that it is sort of, open source, the open source model, is the real business benefit to IBM just all of the insight that you glean and its contribution to your strategic planning from a product and service delivery standpoint?
There's certainly an element of that. Probably more importantly, though, is the access that it gives our client-facing teams to senior business leaders. Yeah. I mean, IBM is fundamentally an IT company, whether it's IT product or services or solutions. But increasingly, what these studies are telling us is that the decision-making around IT services and solutions is moving into the business units. And in order for IBM to succeed as a corporation, we need to be talking to those influencers and understanding the challenges that they're having and how they're looking to leverage and employ advanced technical capabilities to do some of the things that the traditional IT departments of the past may or may not have been responsible for.
Okay. All right. So the specific element of the C-suite study that we're really going to start to dive deeper into now is the one that's called Redefining Markets, Insights from the Global C-Suite Study with the CMO's Perspective. And of course, we're going to link this up in our show notes so my listeners know that. But let's start with what are the key takeaways from the CMO's perspective? What are the key takeaways in this report?
Right. So of the 5,000 interviews overall, we met with about a little over 700 chief marketing officers, and obviously not all of them had the title chief marketing officer. They would be marketing director, marketing manager, sales and marketing, chief customer officer, those sorts of things. Anyone who had the ultimate responsibility for that type of function. We're really interested in three aspects. Firstly, to delve into issues that are of particular interest and significance to the marketing function, as opposed to the other major business areas. Secondly, to compare how CMOs see things relative to their C-suite peers. And then thirdly, to understand how, or in some cases if, CMOs work with their colleagues around the boardroom table to solve some of the bigger challenges that are facing their industry. So to get a sense of all that, we first need to cover off what were the major themes or the big issues coming out of the study of the wider C-suite group. And the major theme that really emerged quite strongly in this latest study was around the idea that industry barriers are being broken down, or they're dissolving or converging as new competition is emerging seemingly out of nowhere in many cases, and not only taking some of your market share, but very often upending your entire industry. And many respondents that we spoke to talked about the idea of being Uberized or Netflixed or Spotified, and often in terms that they weren't necessarily affected directly by those companies. It's become
it's a metaphor. It's a metaphor.
Exactly. And this is really the major thing that's keeping C-suite leaders awake at night now. The fact that if it hasn't already happened to them, the fear that a digital invader could come out from nowhere and targeting not just their company as a new competitor, but completely changing the dynamics of the industry. So this concept of industry convergence, which is driven by disruptive innovation, whether it's of a product or a business model kind, goes on and upsets the dynamics of the market, the nature of competition, really redefining entire industries. And these issues were the ones that fall squarely in the CMO's lap. As the Chief Marketing Officer perspective looks at how they are responding specifically to these types of challenges, and then at a more detailed level, how the top performing CMOs or the CMOs that work for top performing organizations, how they have a slightly different outlook and perspective on what to do about these challenges, or in some cases opportunities, compared to perhaps the less successful organizations, ones that we call market followers. So there are some subtle differences, and sometimes not so subtle, that highlight ways to approach this change in market and competitive behavior, and sometimes turn the tables on the digital invaders.
Okay, so you've obviously already alluded to the trend that you saw from these interviews around disruption, but there's something else that I actually was really intrigued by in the report, Stephen, and that is the concept of destruction, not just disruption, but there was concern about industry destruction. And what really struck me about that is that is the kind of fear and concern and business issue that I would expect CEOs and other C-level executives to be focused on. I understand disruption and CMOs worrying about how to handle disruption, but destruction? So you want to elaborate on why CMOs are even thinking about and planning how to respond to industry destruction?
Sure. And it certainly is something that CEOs are very concerned about. No, there's no question about that. The key thing that alludes to why CMOs should be interested comes down to the fact that it is related to markets, competition, and customers. And so what we're hearing is that from CEOs, in fact, is that when these issues are coming to the table, they're turning to the CMO as the customer, as the voice of the customer, the representative of the market, and saying to the CMO, well, what do you think? What should we do about this? And CMOs really need to be prepared for these types of conversations, because the potential impact on a business is so significant if one of the internet giants, Google, Amazon, Apple, Alibaba, if you're in Asia, turn their attention to your industry for whatever reason. That's one type of destruction that could occur. Another type is from, we call the concept of ankle biters, where a large number of very small companies targeting just a narrow part of the value chain start to build up, in the sense that each individual company is not going to have a major impact on your business. But when there's so many of them, overall they start to squeeze the overall share of the market down to a point where they become a major factor in and of themselves. And so the notion of creative destruction is really turning the tables, if you like. So while disruptive innovation is kind of like something that happens to you or happens to your business or industry, creative destruction is an idea that says, let's get on the front foot. Let's, rather than wait for this to happen, for someone else to do something to us, let's go out there, actively look for ways that we can disrupt or destruct our current business model before it gets done to us. And even taking it one step further, how do we take our existing capabilities within our business and go out and look at new markets, new industries, and disrupt them?
Okay. So, is it fair to say that destruction and disruption are really synonymous, perhaps one being a little bit more dramatic than the other?
I think they're part of the same thing, and it's more a perspective where you can be disrupted, or you can go out and actively create the disruption yourself.
Right. Okay. So, what from these interviews of 700 plus CMOs, what are the top priorities that these CMOs around the world are focused on?
Right. The top priorities are really around how do we protect our existing industry and markets and customers if we're not going to go out and suddenly become a disruptor ourselves. How do we at least protect what we have and hopefully grow that? And so what CMOs are seeing as their best way to do that is to very consistently across every touch point, channel, whether that's online or offline, is to really be very, very focused on customer experience and providing that consistent experience across all of those points. So this is not a new concept. I mean, customer experience has been a concern of marketing people for a number of years. Perhaps what's new and interesting now is how they're going to go about doing that. So one of the first areas that we see the top performing companies, the torchbearers, doing is making more focus on customer journey mapping. And this is being seen as much more of a critical area, and the ability to recognize that a customer journey is not linear, that there are multiple moments of truth, as Brian Solis talks about in his book, The End of Business as Usual. And it's very dynamic and it's increasingly complex, but the torchbearers recognize that this is an absolutely critical element that they need to understand and be able to plan for, strategize around, and adapt as required. And then the other part of the customer experience is really focusing on how do we use different channels and manage the different options that customers have when they want to engage with an organization. And we're seeing that there's quite a strong trend moving away from, in terms of prioritization and investment, moving away from face-to-face channels and one-on-one engagement towards digital, online, virtual channels.
Okay.
And this is, I think, to be very much expected, as you know, we all know with the growth in digital devices and so forth, and as more and more business is transacted in a mobile and an online environment. One of the caveats or dangers we see in this is the assumption that this is being driven by millennials, which in part is true. But the danger is that companies go too far and focus all of their efforts and resources on the online side of things. One of the key messages that millennials gave us in another study that we performed last year was to say that while they increasingly rely primarily on digital online channels, companies will need to be very careful about not continuing to invest in the face-to-face side of things, because it's those moments when you do need additional help that companies really do themselves a disservice by not having sufficient resources and investment placed in the face-to-face channels. So the key that I think the torchbearers were saying is that yes, while they need to have digital and online working really effectively and engagingly, is absolutely critical that the traditional channels as well have the same level of information and resources and consistent relationship or consistent experience, should I say, across
okay.
respective.
By the way, you mentioned Brian Solis and his comment on the whole customer journey mapping, customer experience. So you may not know this, and for any listener who's tuning in for the first time, this is episode 110. Well, just go back to 109, just one episode previous to this, and that's Brian Solis, and we are talking on that episode about the customer experience. So I just wanted to mention that. So, Stephen, this is a great segue. This last area we just discussed about how CMOs are using the online experience as part of their focus on customer experience. So what did you get out of this study in terms of the CMO's ability to just stay in touch with the whole digital landscape, the digital acumen among modern CMOs? How's that going? Because my impression has been, both anecdotally, just from my day-to-day activities, as well as things that I've read, that CMOs have struggled with that. So what did this research tell you on the digital acumen?
Yeah, they certainly have struggled with it. We actually saw this highlighted in the last in the previous C-suite study, where CMOs were calling out the data explosion as one of their biggest challenges, and a very small number were saying back a year or two ago that they had any kind of handle on the data explosion. At the same time, they were recognizing that it was fast becoming an area of the CMO's responsibility to be bringing on the sort of skills around data analysts, data scientists, to manipulate, understand, leverage the wealth of data, structured and unstructured, that's coming in. And this really points to quite a big shift in the CMO role, moving away from traditional marketing, advertising, public relations, promotional type work that marketing has long been associated with, to become much more about perhaps being a chief data officer, or chief digital officer, chief experience officer. A much wider remit than they have been responsible for in the past. So in the last, in the current study, we saw a dramatic increase in the number of CMOs who said that they were now, or felt that they did now have a strong handle on the data explosion. Torchbearers even more so. So what we've seen is that those companies that have invested not only in tools, but in the people skills to be able to analyze, understand, and leverage the richness of data that's coming into the company, as well as through external sources. And so really the whole marketing skill profile is changing so dramatically that increasingly the data analytics role, where it may have sat in IT in the past, is now very much a marketing domain. And I think we'll continue to see that grow. It's become such a key demand in the marketplace that while many companies are looking to hire in, equally so, the more the more aggressive and advanced companies are simply going out and looking for partners to help them do this. They can't sit around and wait for the right person to come along. They're really looking to collaborate.
Well, it's a skill set that's in short supply relative
absolutely.
to the demand. Yeah. I mean, I've written about this before and spoken about it, and I break it into two buckets, the quants and the Crayolas. So the quants are the data people, and the Crayolas are the creatives. And marketing departments need both, but the quants are in short supply.
The pendulum has shifted dramatically in the last few years, and towards the quants, as you call them.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. So then the kind of the bow in the report that I felt was really just a compelling point, and that is, given all this background and where we just left off about the need for this digital acumen, so how do CMOs need to reconcile this and seize the opportunity through both digital and cognitive technologies? Right.
So just as we're saying that the pendulum has shifted towards quantitative, we can see from the data that the top performing companies have invested more in not only the people skills, but also in the sort of analytical capabilities to allow them to do much, much more than, again, what traditional analytics in a marketing sense have been done, which would be around marketing campaigns or next best action type of activities. But really looking to bring on the sort of predictive, prescriptive analytics and ultimately cognitive computing capabilities to help their organization look further ahead, to answer the sort of questions about the nature of the competitive landscape, how that's changing, what are customers doing, not just within our industry, what are the major shifts and trends going on in adjacent industries that could point to either new threats coming in or new opportunities where we should be shifting our resources and capabilities into a different market completely as these industry barriers continue to break down. So it's not only opening up opportunities for competitors to come in, but also for businesses to look beyond their traditional boundaries and say, hey, we've got some unique capabilities here. Let's go and disrupt the disruptors before it happens to us. So it's really the fact that there's so much data information available that marketing is in a unique position to take advantage of the fact that the tools are there. They have the people, or should have the people coming on board to be able to analyze that and to therefore be much more useful to their organization at a strategic perspective, really moving beyond their traditional marketing areas of focus and responsibility.
Okay, terrific. Well, let me now recap our conversation, Stephen, and then I'm going to ask you to either fill in any holes or elaborate or clarify any of my recap points.
Sure.
So we began with a definition of the IBM C-suite study, how it's a part of a study of business leaders around the world with IBV. And I didn't jot down what the acronym stands for.
Yeah, the Institute for Business Value.
Business Value. Okay, terrific. You said it's the 18th global C-suite study that you that the beauty of it is that you can observe patterns and trends that are happening across the world. You conduct these interviews face to face. I didn't know that, and I always wanted to know that.
Yeah,
and,
not me personally, thank goodness. But
yeah, I bet. Wow, frequent flyer miles galore on that. And those face-to-face interviews really provide some qualitative insights in addition to all of the quantitative data. This last report has more than 5,000 interviews with more than with executives across 70 countries, And it really just provides access to the C-suite, which is, and there's great, business benefit to that. And that you also are observing that decision-making for IT products, services, and solutions are moving into the business units. So this also affords you the ability to just, move across the enterprise.
Yep.
So we, of course, talked about the CMO perspective, and the key takeaways from the 700 plus CMOs that were interviewed was really across three aspects. How it affects their marketing function, how the CMOs can see this information compared to other C-suite members, and how CMOs can then collaborate with their colleagues in the C-suite to solve the business problems that they identify. And the report points out that you kind of put the CMOs into two categories: torchbearers, which were sort of market-leading, advanced companies who are successful, and market followers who are, I'm going to use the word laggard. I'm not sure that you would agree with that, but less successful.
That is the sentiment. Yep.
Okay, great. And that they identify that industry barriers are dissolving as new competitors are emerging, and some of these are disruptives. They use the word Uberized as a verb, and of course we've heard that before, and how that's being driven by disruptive innovation. But the torchbearers are approaching it more proactively than the market followers are, and how we talked a little bit about destructive innovation and why CMOs are on the watch out for that, because they need to understand what's going on in the markets, how customers are responding, not responding, what competitors are doing, and the CMOs feel the pressure, the need, the responsibility to have these conversations with the CEOs and other members of the C-suite to really do some planning for that. You mentioned the anchor biters, who may not necessarily be destructors, but can come in and eat market share from competitors that perhaps they wasn't even on the radar at one point in time. And you talked about creative destruction as well, and how brands can look for ways to be disruptors themselves before they get disrupted. Mm-hmm. Then we talked about the CMO's top priorities, how to protect the current customer base, to stay focused on the customer experience, customer journey mapping. You mentioned that it's not a linear experience. And of course, we also talked about that in episode 109 with Brian Solis. How to use different channels to engage the customer, and how, of course, more of that engagement is moving online. However, the more advanced companies, the torchbearers, are really balancing that degree of online experience without sacrificing or compromising the human interaction that's required to deliver a great experience. And then we talked about the digital acumen requirements of the CMO, and how the data explosion has been a big challenge for the CMO, and how the CMO recognizes the need for data scientists and data analysts on their staff to do the proper analysis that they need, and how this is really kind of evolving the role of the CMO to be less about marketing campaigns and more about being the chief digital officer or the chief experience officer, by harnessing the power of data in order to create those great experiences. And how the torchbearers have really been the ones leading the charge on the investment in both tools and also the people skills, as well as partnering with companies that can deliver on that, especially since there's a shortage of those skills in the talent pool. And how the top performing companies, the torchbearers, have invested in more predictive and prescriptive analytics, and that they're really looking further ahead to understand the nature of the competitive landscape, understand where the threats might be, as well as where the opportunities might be, so that the CMO can really, in the end, be the innovator in the C-suite by identifying both threats and opportunities, and then bringing those opportunities to the C-suite to recommend strategic planning and action. So that's my summary. Let me know what you'd like to elaborate on or clarify.
I think you captured that perfectly. The last thing I would add, I suppose, is one of the quotes from the study talked about the fact that the CMO has to become the custodian of the customer experience, not just the head of the arts and crafts department.
Right.
And I think that just captures this shift in the role of the CMO and of the marketing function perfectly.
Yeah, I like that. CMO has to become the custodian of the customer experience, not just the head of the arts and crafts department.
Mm-hmm.
That's terrific. Love that. All right. All right. Well, Stephen, where would you like to send people online? Of course, my listeners know that we'll have a link to the report in our show notes. But of course, where would you like to send people online to get to know more about you, connect with you, and anything else about the IBM Global C-Suite study?
So the main portal is ibm.com/C-Suite study, all one word.
Okay.
And you can go there and download for free copies of the overall report, of the CMO perspective, and a wealth of other material, including video interviews with thought leaders from inside and outside IBM. You can even take a mini survey from the study itself to see how you compare in real time against some of the global results.
Outstanding. Well, again, my listeners know that we will link that up in the show notes. So, Stephen, thank you so much for joining me.
It's been a pleasure,
today.
Bernie. Thank you.
Really appreciate your insights and, of course, the insights from the CMO's perspective. Well, I hope that you enjoyed my conversation with Stephen Marshall, Asia Pacific Program Manager for IBM's Global C-Suite Study. This episode is sponsored by our very own Social Business Workshop for Business Development. To learn more about this online workshop, just visit socialbusinessengine.com/workshops. And if you're not subscribed by email to get our weekly podcast updates, which we send every Friday, and you'd like to be, and I hope you would, just visit our subscribe page at our website, socialbusinessengine.com. And hey, if you are so inclined to write a review of this podcast on iTunes so that others might discover this Social Business Engine podcast, we have a direct link to our podcast on iTunes. Just go to socialbusinessengine.com/iTunes. And lastly, I invite you to engage with me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is my name, @BernieBorges. And this podcast is also on Twitter and on Instagram with the same handle, which is @SBEngine. And you can follow our hashtag SBEShow. Well, that's going to do it for episode 110. I want to thank my guest once again, Stephen Marshall, Asia Pacific Program Manager for IBM's Global C-Suite Study. This is Bernie Borges of Find and Convert, wishing you continued success on your social business journey.